So when I came to your office to check your computers for viruses, I found something. My words hung in the air, heavy and charged, as I stared at my wife, Sarah. She was perched on the back of the couch, her eyes wide with fear, and I could see her mind racing, trying to anticipate what I would say next. "Tom, what do you mean?" she stammered, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. I was just doing my job, going through your files to make sure everything was clean. But then, I found a video. I saw the color drain from her face as she processed what I had said. She tried to interrupt, to deny whatever it was she thought I had seen, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don T," I said, my voice firmer now. "Don T lied to me. I saw the video, Sarah. I saw everything." Her eyes filled with tears and she jumped to her feet, almost tripping over the coffee table in her haste to get away from me. "Oh my God, Tom, I can explain, explain!" I cut her off, my voice rising. "Explain how you were satisfying your boss and his two partners at the same time? Explain how you could do something like that? To me?" She started to sob, her whole body shaking with the force of it. I never meant for you to find out. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "A mistake is leaving the stove on or forgetting an appointment. What you did. That wasn't a mistake, Sarah. That was a choice to betray me." She sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands as she wept. I could feel the anger and betrayal churning inside me, threatening to spill over. I had never imagined that I would be in this situation, confronting my wife about something so vile, so unimaginable. "You never loved me, did you?" I asked, my voice cracking. "All those years together, and it meant nothing to you, did it?" "Tom, no!" she cried, looking up at me with pleading eyes. "I love you. I swear I do. I got caught up in something, and I didn't know how to get out of it." I shook my head, unable to believe her. "And what about them? Your boss, his partners. Were you just having fun with them? Was that your way of getting out of it?" She shook her head, her tears flowing freely now. "No, it wasn't tea like that. They pressured me and I was scared. I thought I would lose my job, my reputation, everything." I stared at her, trying to find some semblance of truth in her words, but all I could see was the image of her in that video, the way she looked at them, the way she had been so willing, so eager to please. It made me sick to my stomach. "I don't know what to do, Sarah," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." She reached out to me, but I stepped back, out of her reach. I couldn't bear to be near her, not after what I had seen. "Please, Tom," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please give me a chance to make this right. I love you. I don't want to lose you." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for so long, and felt a deep, gnawing pain in my chest. I didn't know if we could ever go back to the way things were, or if I even wanted to try. "I need time," I said, turning away from her. "I need time to think about this, about us, but right now I can to be here." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving her behind, leaving everything behind, not knowing where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that my life had just changed forever, and I wasn't sure if I would ever be the same again. I left the house that night without a plan, just driven by an overwhelming need to escape the suffocating weight of what I had just discovered. The night air was cold, biting against my skin as I walked aimlessly through the empty streets. My mind was a whirlwind, a chaotic mess of anger, betrayal, and confusion. I kept seeing the images from that video, burned into my mind like a brand that I couldn't escape. I ended up at a bar a few blocks away, the kind of place I'd never usually go. It was dimly lit, with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hanging in the air. I slid onto a stool at the bar and ordered a drink, something strong enough to dull the pain, if only for a little while. As I sat there, nursing my drink, I kept replaying the events of the evening over and over in my head. How had I missed it? How had I not seen the signs? Or worse, had I seen them and just chosen to ignore them, pretending everything was fine? I took a long swig from my glass, trying to wash down the bitter taste of my thoughts, but it didn't help. Nothing would, not tonight. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see Sarah S.'s name on the screen. For a moment, I considered answering, but the thought of hearing her voice, of listening to more of her lies, made me sick. I let it ring, watching as the call went to voicemail. She called again, and again. By the third time, ID had enough. I turned off the phone and shoved it back in my pocket, signaling the bartender for another drink. But even with the alcohol, I couldn't drown out the thoughts, the questions that kept gnawing at me. Who was Sarah, really? The woman ID married? The woman ID loved for years? Had it all been a lie? Or had she just changed somewhere along the way, and ID been too blind to see it? I lost track of how long I sat there, staring at the glass in front of me, lost in my thoughts. Eventually, the bartender gave me a sympathetic look and told me it was closing time. I nodded, throwing some bills on the counter before stumbling out into the night. The streets were empty, silent except for the distant hum of traffic. I walked slowly, my feet dragging as I made my way back to the house. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there. Didn't even know if I wanted to go back. But there was nowhere else to go. When I reached the front door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. I could see the light on in the living room through the window. Sarah was still up, waiting for me. I almost turned around, almost walked away, but something inside me pushed me to go in, to face her, to face this mess that my life had become. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and Sarah S.'s head snapped up as I stepped inside. Her eyes were red and puffy, her face pale, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her, almost. "Tom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank God you were back." "I've been so worried." I didn't respond, just stared at her, taking in the sight of her sitting there looking so small, so broken. It was a far cry from the woman I had seen in that video, the woman who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice rough, raw. "Why did you do it, Sarah?" She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together nervously. "I don't know," she whispered. "It just happened. I was weak, and they took advantage of that." "Don T, give me that!" I snapped, my anger flaring up again. "You're not some innocent victim here, Sarah. You made a choice. You chose to sleep with them, to betray me." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I know, Tom, I know, and I hate myself for it. But you have to believe me, I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, I really do." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Love? You call this love? What you did it is the furthest thing from love I can imagine." She started to cry harder, her sobs filling the room, but I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her. All I could feel was a deep, hollow pain in my chest, a pain that threatened to consume me whole. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Sarah," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I even want to try." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Tom, please," she begged. "Please don't say that. We can work through this, we can get past it. I'll do anything, I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes. Just please don't leave me." I didn't answer her, didn't know what to say. I was so torn, so lost in my own pain and anger that I couldn't see a way forward. Finally, I turned and walked away, heading for the bedroom. "I need to sleep," I muttered. "We'll talk in the morning." I heard her sobs following me as I closed the bedroom door behind me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not now. As I lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I wondered if anything would ever be the same again. Somehow, deep down, I knew the answer. No matter what happened, no matter what choices I made, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had barely slept. The night had been a restless haze of dark thoughts and cold realizations. Every time I closed my eyes, the images from that video haunted me, replaying in my mind like a twisted nightmare I couldn't escape. I dragged myself out of bed and into the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face in an attempt to shake off the fog. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror, the bags under my eyes more pronounced than ever. I looked like a man who had aged years overnight. When I finally emerged from the bedroom, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't see Sarah anywhere, and for a moment, I wondered if she had left. But as I walked into the kitchen, I found her sitting at the table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She looked up when she heard me enter, her eyes swollen and bloodshot from crying. I felt a pang of guilt seeing her like that, but it was quickly overshadowed by the anger and betrayal simmering just beneath the surface. "Morning," I muttered, my voice rough from sleep and lingering resentment. "Morning," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The tension between us was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Neither of us seemed to know what to say, how to even begin to address the mess we were in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah spoke. "I made coffee," she said, gesturing weakly to the pot on the counter. "Thanks," I said, though the thought of food or drink turned my stomach. I poured myself a cup anyway, more for something to do than out of any real desire to drink it. We sat in silence for a long time, both of us sipping our coffee and avoiding each other's eyes. The minutes dragged on, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us like a heavy blanket. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, even if they were ones I didn't want to hear. "So," I began, setting my cup down on the table with a heavy thud. "What happens now, Sarah?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation. "Tom, I don't know," she admitted. "I have been trying to figure that out myself, but I am so scared of losing you. I can imagine my life without you." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. "Did you think about that when you were with them? Did you think about me at all?" Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands. "I did, Tom, I swear I did, but I was weak," and she trailed off, shaking her head as if trying to make sense of it all herself. "Stop saying they pressured you," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "You had a choice. You could have said no, but you didn't." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. "I know," she whispered. "I know I could have said no, and I hate myself for it. I was stupid and selfish, and I let things get so out of hand. But Tom, I never stopped loving you. Please believe that. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But the images from that video were seared into my brain, impossible to forget. How could she say she loved me when she had done something so unforgivable? "I don't know if I can get past this," I said, my voice raw with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to take mine. I hesitated for a moment before pulling my hand away, unable to let her touch me. "Tom," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I will do whatever it takes to make this right. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just please, Dawn, to leave me. Dawn, to throw away what we have." "What we had," I corrected her coldly. "Whatever we had, it's gone now. You killed it the moment you decided to betray me." Her face crumpled as she broke down into sobs, but I couldn't find it in myself to comfort her. I just sat there, feeling numb, empty. I had loved this woman with everything I had, and she had torn my heart out without a second thought. "Maybe we need some time apart," I suggested, my voice devoid of any real emotion. "Some time to figure out what we want, if there's even anything left to salvage." "No!" she cried, shaking her head frantically. "Please, Tom, don't say that. I don't want to be apart from you. We can work through this. I know we can." I stood up, pushing my chair back with a screech. "I need space, Sarah. I can think clearly with you here, and I need to think. I need to figure out if I can live with this, with what you've done." She stood up too, moving toward me as if to stop me from leaving. But I stepped back, holding up a hand. "I'm not leaving for good," I said, seeing the panic in her eyes. "I just need some time, okay?" Her shoulders slumped in defeat, and she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Okay," she whispered. "Take as much time as you need. Just please come back to me." I didn't answer, couldn't answer. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, grabbing my jacket and keys as I headed for the door. As I stepped outside, the cold morning air hit me, but it did little to clear the fog in my head. I got into my car and started the engine, not knowing where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there, not with her, not with everything I had seen and heard. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I thought about the years we had spent together, the life we had built, and how it had all come crashing down in an instant. And I wondered, deep down, if I would ever be able to pick up the pieces. The road stretched out before me, a blur of asphalt and white lines as I drove with no destination in mind. The radio played softly in the background, but I barely heard it, lost in my thoughts. The betrayal, the hurt, it all swirled around in my head, leaving me feeling hollow. I drove through town after town, the scenery changing but the pain staying the same. I couldn't escape it, no matter how far I went. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky, and still I kept driving, as if the movement would somehow shake off the memories that clung to me like a dark cloud. Eventually, the need for fuel both for the car and for myself forced me to stop. I pulled into a small, rundown gas station off the highway, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. I parked at one of the pumps and got out, stretching my stiff legs. As I filled up the tank, I noticed a small diner across the street. My stomach rumbled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since the night before. It wasn't exactly a 5-star establishment, but it would do. After paying for the gas, I crossed the street and pushed open the door to the diner. A bell jingled overhead, announcing my arrival. The place was nearly empty, just a few old-timers nursing their coffee at the counter. The waitress behind the counter gave me a tired smile and gestured for me to take a seat wherever I liked. I chose a booth near the window, sliding into the cracked vinyl seat. The menu was simple burgers, sandwiches, and breakfast served all day. I ordered a cup of coffee and a sandwich, more out of routine than hunger. As I waited for my food, I stared out the window, watching cars pass by on the highway. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, about the life we had shared. I felt like I was trapped in a bad dream, one I couldn't wake up from no matter how hard I tried. The waitress returned with my coffee and I took a sip, letting the bitterness jolt me back to the present. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't notice the person who had slid into the seat across from me until they spoke. Tom? I looked up, startled to see a familiar face sitting across from me. It was Jake, an old friend from college I hadn't seen in years. We had lost touch after graduation, each of us going our separate ways, but there he was, looking almost exactly the same as the last time I'd seen him. Jake? I asked, still trying to wrap my head around the coincidence. In the flesh, he replied with a grin. Man, it's been a long time. What are you doing all the way out here? I blinked, still trying to process seeing him. I could ask you the same thing. I didn't even know you lived around here. Jake shrugged, leaning back in the booth. I moved out this way a couple of years ago. Needed a change of pace, you know? But what about you? I never thought I'd run into you in a place like this. I hesitated, not sure how much I wanted to share. But there was something about seeing an old friend, someone who knew me before all of this, that made me feel like I could let my guard down, even if just a little. Things have been rough, I admitted, my voice low. I needed to get away, clear my head. Jake's expression softened and he nodded. I get it. Life can throw some real curveballs sometimes. You want to talk about it? I stared at him, wondering if I should. But then, before I could stop myself, the words started spilling out about Sarah, about what I had found, about the crushing sense of betrayal that had taken over my life. Jake listened quietly, not interrupting, just letting me get it all out. It felt oddly cathartic to talk about it, to say everything that had been swirling around in my head since the night before. By the time I finished, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, even if only slightly. Damn, man, Jake said when I finally stopped. That is some heavy stuff. I'm really sorry to hear you were going through that. Yeah, I muttered, staring down at my coffee. It's been a lot to handle. Jake was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You know, you are doing the right thing by taking some time for yourself. It's a lot to process, and you need to figure out what's best for you. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what the right thing even was anymore. I just don't know if I can ever forgive her, Jake. How do you come back from something like this? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Honestly, I don't know. Everyone is different, and every situation is different. But I do know that you can divorce it. If you are not ready to forgive her, then Don T. Take the time you need to figure out what you want. I appreciated his honesty, even if it didn't give me the clear answers I was hoping for. But maybe that was the point. There weren't any clear answers in a situation like this. Just a lot of messy emotions and difficult decisions. The waitress returned with my sandwich and Jake ordered a coffee for himself. As I ate, we talked about lighter things, our college days, mutual friends, what we had been up to over the years. It was a welcome distraction, a brief respite from the storm raging in my mind. When I finished my meal, I felt a little more grounded, like I could face the rest of the day without completely falling apart. Thanks for listening, Jake, I said as we got up to leave. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk about it. Anytime, man, he replied, clapping me on the shoulder. If you need a place to crash for a while, I've got a spare room. You are welcome to stay as long as you need. I was tempted to take him up on the offer, but I wasn't ready to be around people just yet, not even an old friend. I appreciate it, but I think I'm going to keep driving. Clear my head some more. Jake nodded, understanding. Just know the offer's there, and if you ever need to talk, you've got my number. Thanks, I said, meaning it. I'll keep that in mind. We said our goodbyes, and I walked back to my car, feeling a little more at ease. The road was still uncertain, and I had no idea where it would lead me, but at least now I didn't feel so alone. As I pulled out of the parking lot and headed back toward the highway, I thought about what Jake had said about taking the time to figure out what I wanted, what I needed. Maybe that was the first step toward healing, even if the path ahead was still shrouded in darkness. I drove for hours after leaving the diner, the miles slipping by in a blur as the sun began to set on the horizon. The conversation with Jake had given me a temporary sense of clarity, but as night fell, the doubts and fears started to creep back in, gnawing at me from the inside. By the time I pulled off the highway, I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. I found a cheap motel, the kind of place that looked like it catered more to drifters and truckers than families on vacation. It was perfect, no questions, no expectations, just a place to lay my head and try to sleep. The room was as dingy as I expected, with threadbare carpets and peeling wallpaper, but it was quiet, and that was all I cared about. I tossed my bag onto the bed and sat down, staring at the cracked ceiling as if it might somehow hold the answers I was searching for. My thoughts drifted back to Sarah, to everything that had happened. I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind over and over again the moment I found the video, the look of fear on her face when she realized I knew, the hollow emptiness that had settled in my chest since then. I reached for my phone, hesitating for a moment before turning it back on. A flood of missed calls and messages appeared on the screen, all from Sarah. My heart twisted as I scrolled through them, reading her desperate pleas for me to come home, to talk to her, to forgive her. But there was one message that stood out from the others, one that made my blood run cold. It was from an unknown number sent late in the afternoon. Tom, I know what you're going through. If you want the truth, meet me at the park tomorrow at noon. Come alone. I stared at the message, a sense of unease creeping over me. Who would send something like this? And what did they mean by the truth? What more was there to know? My first instinct was to ignore it, to delete the message and forget about it. But something stopped me, some nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I couldn't shake. What if there was more to this than I realized? What if there was something I didn't know, something that could change everything? I couldn't help myself. The curiosity, the need for answers, was too strong. I decided that I would go to the park, that I would find out what this person had to say. If there was even a chance that it could help me make sense of this mess, I had to take it. The next morning, I barely touched the stale breakfast provided by the motel. My nerves were shot, my mind racing with possibilities both hopeful and terrifying. Who could this person be? A friend of Sarah S? Someone from her office? Or maybe one of the men from the video? The thought made my skin crawl, but I couldn't dismiss it. I had to be prepared for anything. By the time I arrived at the park, the sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty playground. It was the kind of place that was probably full of kids on weekends, but today it was eerily quiet. I parked the car and walked toward a bench near the center of the park, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat down, scanning the area for any sign of the person who had sent the message. Minutes passed, each one dragging on longer than the last. I was starting to think it had been a cruel joke that no one was coming when I saw someone approaching from the other side of the park. It was a woman, tall and thin, with dark hair pulled back into a ponytail. She was dressed casually, in jeans and a jacket, but there was something about the way she moved that put me on edge. She walked with purpose, her eyes locked on me as she closed the distance. When she reached the bench, she didn't sit down. Instead, she stood in front of me, her expression unreadable. "Tom?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "That's me," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Who are you?" She glanced around as if checking to make sure we were alone, then met my gaze. "My name is Lisa. I am not sure how to say this, so I'll just get straight to the point. I know about Sarah, about what she has done, and I know who she's been doing it with." My breath caught in my throat. You know?" She nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of sympathy and something else, something darker. "I'm the wife of one of the men in the video. I saw what happened, just like you did." A cold chill ran down my spine as I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," she said, her voice hardening. "I've been living with this knowledge for a while now, trying to figure out what to do. But when I found out who you were, I realized you had a right to know too. I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. What do you want from me?" "I don't want anything from you," she replied, her tone softening again. "I just want you to know that you're not alone in this, that you are not the only one who's been hurt." My mind was spinning, a thousand questions racing through my head. "Why didn't you come forward sooner? Why now?" She looked away, her expression pained. "Because I was scared. Scared of what it would mean for me, for my family. But I couldn't keep it to myself any longer, not when I knew you were suffering too." There was a long silence between us, the weight of her words sinking in. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to this unexpected revelation. "Who is your husband?" I finally asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since she had arrived. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "His name is Greg. He is Sarah's boss." The world seemed to tilt on its axis, everything suddenly making a horrible kind of sense. Sarah's boss. The man she worked so closely with, the man she had always spoken of so highly. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? "I'm sorry, Tom," Lisa said, her voice filled with genuine regret. "I wish I could say something to make it better, but I know I can't." I shook my head, barely able to speak. "Thank you for telling me. I don't know what to do with this information, but I appreciate it." She nodded, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. "This is my number. If you ever need to talk, if you ever need anything done, to hesitate to call." I took the paper from her, feeling a strange mix of emotions, gratitude, anger, confusion. "Thanks," I mumbled. Without another word, Lisa turned and walked away, leaving me alone on the bench with my thoughts. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at the piece of paper in my hand, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me like a lead blanket. So, it was Sarah's boss. Her boss, who had probably used his position to manipulate her, to take advantage of her. But that didn't change what she had done, the choices she had made. It didn't erase the betrayal, the lies. I crumpled the paper in my hand, my thoughts a tangled mess. What was I supposed to do now? Confront Greg, confront Sarah again, or just walk away from it all and try to start over? The questions swirled in my mind, but I didn't have any answers. Not yet. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The drive back home felt like a journey through quicksand. Every mile dragged on, and the closer I got, the more suffocating the air became. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white, as my mind raced with the new information Lisa had dropped on me. Sarah's boss, Greg, The man she'd always talked about with respect, maybe even admiration. The pieces were beginning to fit together, but the picture they formed was one I never wanted to see. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to walk into a storm, one that had been brewing for a long time, hidden behind the facade of our marriage. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house looked the same as always, our little slice of normalcy, but now it felt like a shell, a hollow place where trust and love had once lived. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the front door, wondering if I had the strength to go inside and face Sarah. But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. If I was ever going to get any closure, I had to confront her. I had to know the full extent of her betrayal. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was quiet as I stepped inside, and I noticed that Sarah was sitting in the living room, her back to me. She must have heard me come in, but she didn't turn around. "Sarah," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. She flinched at the sound of my voice, and when she turned to face me, her eyes were red and puffy from crying. "Tom, you're back," she whispered, as if she hadn't expected me to return. "Yeah, I'm back," I replied, walking over to stand in front of her. "And we need to talk. Now." She nodded, her hands trembling as she clasped them together in her lap. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I met someone today," I began. "A woman named Lisa. Does that name ring a bell?" Her eyes widened in shock and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I know who she is," she admitted, her voice quivering. "Of course you do," I said bitterly. "She S. Greg S. wife, your boss S. wife, the man you've been sleeping with behind my back." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. "Tom, Don T," I cut her off sharply. "Don T, try to explain it away. Don T, lie to me anymore. I want the truth, Sarah. The whole truth." She looked up at me, her expression a mix of guilt and fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted you to find out. I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, congratulations, Sarah," I snapped. "You did. You hurt me more than I ever thought possible. But now I need to know how deep this goes. How long has it been going on? How many times?" She hesitated, her eyes pleading for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to give. "It started about a year ago," she confessed, her voice trembling. It was just supposed to be a one-time thing, but it didn't stop. I couldn't stop it." "A year?" I repeated, the word feeling like a punch to the gut. "You have been lying to me for an entire year? How many times, Sarah? How many times did you cheat on me?" She bit her lip, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know, Tom. I lost count. It was whenever we could, whenever he wanted." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to yell, to scream at her for what she had done. But I knew that wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the past, or erase the betrayal. "So you just let him use you whenever he wanted," I said coldly. "You threw away our marriage, our life together for that?" "It wasn't like that," she cried, her voice desperate. "I didn't want to hurt you, I swear. I was scared, Tom. I felt trapped, and I didn't know how to get out. But I never stopped loving you. Please, believe that." "How can I believe anything you say?" I asked, my voice breaking. "You've lied to me for so long, Sarah. You lied every day, every time you looked me in the eyes and pretended everything was fine." She reached out to touch me, but I stepped back, unable to bear her touch. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I had once loved more than anything in the world. But now all I could see was the betrayal, the lies, the pain she had caused. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said quietly, my heart heavy with the weight of the truth. "I don't know if I even want to try." She sobbed, her whole body shaking with the force of it, but I couldn't comfort her. I couldn't bring myself to care about her pain, not when my own was so overwhelming. "I need some space," I said, my voice flat. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a while. I need time to think." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear. "Tom, please don't leave me," she begged. "We can work through this. We can go to counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Please, Dante, give up on us." I shook my head, feeling more lost than ever. "I don't know, Sarah. I just don't know anymore." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her sobbing behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. As I got into my car and drove away, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me like a crushing burden. The truth was out, and now I had to figure out what to do with it. But as I drove aimlessly through the night, one thought kept echoing in my mind: nothing would ever be the same again. Part 7. A Friend in Need. I drove with no destination in mind, just the need to get away from the suffocating walls of the life I'd known. The truth had been laid bare, and it felt like a gaping wound that refused to heal. I didn't know where to go or what to do, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house, in that life, any longer. My thoughts were a chaotic mess as I sped down the highway. I felt a cocktail of emotions: rage, despair, betrayal, all swirling around inside me, and I had no idea how to make sense of them. Every mile I put between myself and Sarah only intensified the ache in my chest. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? How had the woman I loved become a stranger? Before I knew it, I found myself pulling into the driveway of Jake S. house. I hadn't consciously made the decision to go there, but somehow, it felt like the only place I could go. Jake had been there for me yesterday, offering support without judgment, and right now, I needed that more than anything. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to collect myself, but the overwhelming sadness and anger inside me made it impossible. I finally stepped out, my legs feeling weak, and walked up to his door. I rang the bell, and within seconds, the door swung open. Jake took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Tom," he said, his voice full of concern. "What happened? Come in, man." I walked inside, feeling like I was on the verge of collapse. The moment the door closed behind me, I finally broke. All the emotions I'd been holding back came crashing down, and before I knew it, I was sobbing uncontrollably. Jake guided me to the couch and sat down next to me, his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything, just let me cry. Let me pour out all the pain and anger and confusion that had been festering inside me since the moment I discovered Sarah S.'s betrayal. When the tears finally slowed, leaving me exhausted and drained, Jake handed me a glass of water. I took it gratefully, my hands still shaking as I tried to compose myself. "What happened, Tom?" Jake asked gently, his voice filled with genuine concern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself enough to speak. "I confronted Sarah," I began, my voice hoarse from crying. "She admitted everything. The affair, the lies. It's been going on for over a year, Jake. A whole year of her sneaking around behind my back." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Damn, man. I'm so sorry you were going through this. I can even imagine how you must be feeling right now." "I don't even know how I feel," I admitted, my voice shaking. "Part of me is so angry I want to scream. But then there's this other part of me that just feels broken, like everything I thought I knew was a lie." He nodded, his expression sympathetic. "It's normal to feel that way. You've been through something traumatic, and it's going to take time to process it all." I stared down at the floor, my thoughts spinning. I just don't know what to do now. Do I try to forgive her? Do I leave her? How do you even begin to move on from something like this? Jake was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "That is not something anyone else can decide for you, Tom. But what I do know is that you need to take care of yourself right now. You need to give yourself the time and space to figure out what you want, what you need. Don't rush into any decisions, just focus on healing." Healing. It sounded like such a simple concept, but in that moment it felt like the hardest thing in the world. How could I ever heal from this? How could I ever be whole again? "I don't know if I can," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "You can," Jake said firmly, his voice full of conviction. "It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. But you're strong, Tom, stronger than you think, and you don't have to do it alone. You've got people who care about you, who are here for you." I looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Thanks, Jake," I said quietly. I don't know what I'd do without you. Hey, what are friends for? He replied with a small smile. You've always been there for me, so now it's my turn to be there for you. I nodded, feeling a small flicker of hope amidst the darkness. Maybe he was right. Maybe I could get through this even if it felt impossible right now. Do you want to stay here tonight? Jake offered. You can crash in the guest room as long as you need. I hesitated, the thought of staying in a place that wasn't my home feeling both comforting and strange. But I knew I couldn't go back to Sarah, not yet. I needed distance, time to think. Yeah, I finally agreed. I think I'll take you up on that. Jake nodded, standing up. Come on, I'll show you to the guest room. It's not much, but it's comfortable. I followed him down the hallway feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start the healing process. The guest room was small but cozy, with a bed that looked far more inviting than I'd expected. I sat down on the edge, feeling the weight of everything start to settle on me again. Get some rest, Jake said from the doorway. We'll talk more in the morning if you want. Or we can just hang out, whatever you need. Thanks, Jake, I said again, my voice full of gratitude. He nodded and closed the door behind him, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the confrontation, it all felt like a whirlwind, and I was still struggling to catch my breath. But as I lay there in the quiet, I realized something. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. It wasn't much, just a small glimmer, but it was there. Maybe I could get through this. Maybe I could find a way to heal, to move forward even if the path ahead was uncertain. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to start over. With that thought in mind, I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion of the day finally pull me under. The morning light filtered through the curtains, gently waking me from the first decent sleep I'd had in days. For a moment, I lay there in the unfamiliar bed, disoriented, before the memories of the previous day came rushing back. The confrontation with Sarah, the revelations, and my breakdown at Jake S. house, they all felt like a bad dream. But the ache in my chest told me it was all too real. I sat up, rubbing my eyes and trying to shake off the heaviness that clung to me. As much as I wanted to crawl back under the covers and hide from the world, I knew I couldn't. I had to face this, whatever this was going to be. After freshening up, I made my way to the kitchen, where I found Jake already up, a mug of coffee in hand. He looked up as I entered, giving me a small, reassuring smile. Morning, he said, sliding a fresh cup of coffee across the counter toward me. How'd you sleep? Better than I expected, I admitted, taking the cup and wrapping my hands around the warmth. Thanks for letting me stay. Anytime, Jake replied, leaning against the counter. I'm just glad you are here, man. You seemed like you really needed a break last night. I nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. The bitterness was oddly comforting, grounding me in the present. Yeah, I did. I still don't know what to do, though. Everything feels so uncertain. Jake was quiet for a moment, then spoke. I get that, but you don't have to figure everything out all at once, Tom. It's okay to take things one step at a time. His words made sense, but they didn't make the situation any easier. I couldn't just ignore the reality of what had happened, but maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't need to have all the answers right away. Have you thought about what you want to do next? Jake asked gently, as if sensing my inner turmoil. I shook my head, setting the mug down on the counter. I don't even know where to start. Part of me wants to just walk away, to leave it all behind. But then I think about everything we have been through, all the years we spent together, and I don't know if I can just throw that away. Jake nodded, understanding. That's completely normal. You are torn between what you thought you had and what you've discovered. It's a lot to process. I leaned back against the counter, running a hand through my hair. And then there's the question of trust. How can I ever trust her again after everything? How can I be sure this one to happen again? That is a tough one, Jake admitted, Trust is one of those things that once it is broken, it is damn hard to rebuild. But it's not impossible if that S what you decide you want. The question is whether you think it's worth it, whether she is worth it. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. Was Sarah worth it? Was our marriage worth trying to save, after everything that had happened? I didn't have the answer, but the fact that I was even asking myself the question told me how deeply conflicted I was. I don't know if I can ever see her the same way again, I confessed. Every time I think about her now, all I can see is the betrayal. It's just like it tainted everything we had. That is understandable, Jake said, his voice steady. But that doesn't mean it has to be the end. You've got to figure out what you want, what you need, and whether she fits into that picture. And that is going to take time. I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I wish there was a simple answer, a way to just know what to do. Jake gave me a sympathetic look. I wish I could tell you there was, but life is messy, man. Relationships are messy. There's no magic formula for getting through something like this. You just have to take it one day at a time. We fell into a comfortable silence, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. I appreciated Jake's presence, his willingness to listen without judgment, to offer advice without pushing. It was exactly what I needed right now, a friend who was just there, no matter what. After a while, Jake spoke again. You know, it might help to talk to someone, a therapist, I mean. Sometimes it's good to get an outside perspective, someone who can help you work through everything. I hadn't considered therapy before, but now that he mentioned it, it didn't sound like a bad idea. I had a lot to unpack, a lot of emotions and questions that I wasn't sure how to deal with on my own. Maybe, I said slowly. It's worth a shot, I guess. I just need to figure out where to start. I can help with that, Jake offered. I know a few good therapists in the area. I could give you their info if you want. Yeah, I nodded. That would be helpful. Thanks, Jake. No problem, he said, giving me a small smile. We'll get through this, Tom. You're not alone in this. The words were simple, but they meant more to me than I could express. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way through this darkness. Thanks, I repeated, my voice more confident this time. I really appreciate it. We spent the rest of the morning talking, not just about my situation, but about life in general, our college days, old friends, the twists and turns that had brought us to where we were now. It was a welcome distraction, a reminder that there was still life beyond the pain, still a future to be had. By the time noon rolled around, I felt a little more like myself, a little less lost. The road ahead was still uncertain, but at least now I had some direction, some sense of what the next steps might be. Jake handed me a slip of paper with a few names and numbers on it. Here, he said, these are the therapists I mentioned. Give them a call, see if one of them feels like a good fit. I took the paper, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and relief. Thanks, Jake. I'll check them out. Take your time, he replied. No rush. Just know that whatever you decide, you've got people who care about you. I know, I said, meeting his gaze. And that means a lot. As I left Jake's house later that day, I felt a little more at peace, a little more ready to face whatever was coming next. The road ahead was still rocky, but at least now I knew I didn't have to walk it alone. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find my way back to solid ground.